Thanks again for logging on to attend the Community Preparedness Mapping Workshop. And I'm going to go right into the slide deck. This is a preparedness workshop in honor of National Preparedness Month. Oh, hold on 1 second, just having a little technical difficulty here. All of a sudden, oh, there we go. My name is Jill Cornell. I'm a community engagement specialist at New York City Emergency Management. And today, just want to go over some objectives for why we're holding this workshop. We want to show you how local emergency networks or local communities really that are thinking about becoming an emergency network can map local resources and assets that may be useful for preparedness and response. So we are going to go into a little bit of a definition between assets and resources, but we have a really fun way to help you learn the difference and might give you some insights into different kinds of resources and assets that exist right outside your door. We're going to introduce Google My Maps as a tool for mapping and creating a community emergency response directory. And so one thing is we do have a lot of resources that accompany this training, and something that we're going to give that to you early next week, in addition to the slide deck. So our agenda today is welcome. I just welcomed you all, introduced myself. This training is based on the Community Emergency Planning Toolkit. That link will also appear in your resource guide that we're sending out next week. It is based on identifying common emergency needs and finding the local resources with which to satisfy those needs. So the key concepts in this training are community resources and assets, and we try to break it down a little bit and give you a little more information to help identify them in your neighborhood. Google My Maps, there's some of you who might be intimately familiar with Google My Maps. There might be other people who are not. And we're going to take a little bit of the mystery out of it and show you a few examples of how other community emergency networks have used that function. Then we show you how you can take the Google My Maps and create a community resource directory. Again, that's one of the hallmarks of community preparedness and community emergency planning that is featured in the toolkit. Before we get started, just a little overview of what our agency does. A lot of you are very familiar. We have some very familiar faces here to me, so thank you for coming. And for our new friends and colleagues, we want to give you an overview of what we do. So the image on the slide is of the front of our building at 165 Cadman Plaza West. It's got concrete and steel and some glass windows, and it says Office of Emergency Management. So our number one mission is to plan and prepare for emergencies. We also coordinate emergency response and recovery efforts. We educate the public about preparedness. That's what I'm doing today, right now, and collect and disseminate critical information. So those of you that subscribe to Notify NYC or the Advanced Warning System, also known as AWS, get the benefit of the information that we distribute. Diving into the toolkit, which is really the mother of this workshop, if you will, just want to give you a little bit of an overview. On the left is an image of the cover of our toolkit. It says Community Emergency Planning Toolkit for New York City Community and Faith-Based Networks. There's a picture of a couple of people look to be involved in an emergency or disaster response, looking at a piece of paper, and our logo is in the bottom right-hand corner. On the right of your screen is the table of contents section of the toolkit. It's very simply laid out. There's 4 sections, and then each section has chapters in it, if you will. Section 1 is before an emergency. Section 2 is after an emergency. Section 3 is putting your plan into action. And section 4 is additional resources. So once again, you will get the link for this online toolkit when we send out our resources next week. Now comes the fun part of today. We're going to use Mendimeter to find out what's important and what are the needs in your community right now. So if you could go to menti.com, some of you can do it on your desktop, some of you can do it on your phone. I'm going to do it too. And type in, hold on one second. I just need to get this to go away. Oops. Hold on one second. Okay. One second. My apologies. It's just my little technical difficulty here. Mariah, feel free to help me out. I just need to get this toolbar to disappear.
So we just added it into the chat. If you go to Menti, MENTI.com, and then the code you're going to put in is 24955758. And I see that 2 of the folks have joined, and we're going to wait for maybe another dozen folks to reply. Again, if you head over to the chat, you'll see the website. It's Menti, MENTI.com, and the code is 24955758.
So you heard it from Mariah, because I am unable to clear this little toolbar on the top of my screen. You have. So once again, that's it. You can see, I'm going to make this disappear. You can see that your responses are beginning to be recorded. So what I'm seeing right now, food and housing are #1 in the responses. Thank you for participating. It makes it much more lively. You can see Menti is tabulating your responses. So what are some common emergency needs? The #1 need that we see from your participation is food. #2, housing and shelter comes close second. And then pretty much equal after all the rest are emergency medical, access to information, communications, pet care, water, counseling. Thank goodness somebody mentioned mental health, having to go bag ready to go, collaboration, meeting places, evacuation, supplies, prescriptions, DAFN support. So for those of you who might be new to emergency preparedness, DAFN is an acronym and abbreviation for disabilities and others with access or functional needs. So thank you for putting that in. Coordination, yes, we definitely need that. Information, mental health, medical care, supplies, and baby diaper. So there we go. And we're going to go right into, and so we had 12 folks participate in this out of the 16. So that's great. Thank you for that. Now, to get a little bit more specific for us to really find out what's happening in your communities, what is the #1 need in your community today? #1. Don't have to give it a lot of thought. Just what have you heard from your neighbors and other organizations in your network? Flooding, yes. Definitely on all of our minds today after Ida, Henri, and with the storm coming today. Evacuation planning. Vaccines. That's right. If we're not healthy, we can't keep our community safe. Eviction prevention, tying it back to housing, which was mentioned in the previous slides. Jobs with benefits. Yes. So right now we've had 5 people participate. We'd like to see it go up to that original 12. So those other 7 of you that are able to join in, please do. Locating local resources. That's why we're here. We're going to locate and we're going to begin the conversation about how you actually locate local resources, because that is really one of the keys for what we do in our community emergency networks. Housing, absolutely. So it looks like these are fairly equal, that there are different concerns, rapid communication, getting info in time. They are different concerns and everyone has different number one needs. This is pretty fascinating to me because in other presentations where we've used this question, there's sometimes other things bubble up. So that means it's a great opportunity for us. We have a lot of diversity happening in this group. Okay, so maybe a couple more people, the 2 people that if you participated in the other slide, feel free to join in. Okay, so we're going to move on. Community resources. So what are community resources? You answered that question for us on the previous slide, or previous 2 slides, I should say. Mental health and spiritual care, that comes up quite prominent. And I feel, especially after having gone through over 1.5 years of a pandemic and all sorts of different emergencies and disasters, that we're all in a space where we need some TLC in terms of mental health and spiritual care. Donations, of course, food, water, oftentimes clothing, those are important. Sheltering and housing, that often comes up as a first need, certainly for our IDA survivors. That is a huge need all over the city. Cleanup and debris removal has been on the forefront of everyone's mind because the flooding waters, storm waters, et cetera, are often combined with sewage in the city, and that renders any organic material unusable. It must be discarded. Repair and rebuild, that's on the forefront of all of our minds right now to help the IDA survivors get back into safe housing. Volunteer labor, where is it coming from? And if you can think of other community resources, you can put them in the chat right now. So on the left of the screen is a photograph that I took of our friends at the Eastern Queens Alliance. And they were actually one of the first people to host a mapping workshop. So we owe them an enormous thanks for that. They are an alliance, which means they have a lot of different civic associations that are really active in Southeast Queens and have been affected by flooding issues, sewage issues. In addition to other hazards, they have decided to band together to really pool their resources and pool their understanding of what is the immediate concerns for them. And they were instrumental in identifying and help us shape this workshop. And you can see the background of this picture. There are 7 people in a park that's right there near where they have their nature center. So they combine their environmental activism and civic action with teaching young people about the wildlife and different kinds of animals and critters that they actually host in the Environmental Science Learning Center, including a very giant lizard. So we're going to move to the next slide. My apologies, for some reason I'm having just a little bit of a delay. Could be my Wi-Fi signal. So we've identified some resources in our communities, and now I'd like to see what their ranking is for your communities. On this slide, once again, you go back into your Menti slide, which you should have up, and this is a ranking bar. So you can move it up, you kind of slide it up as to what the importance is. And the image on the left is of a New York City bus with an accessible wheelchair ramp that lowers so that folks can get onto the bus if they're using a wheelchair. So rank these resources as to their importance. It could be to you, it could be to your community members. And once again, that code is, you should already be in the menti.com, but the code, in case you got booted out, is go to menti.com, and the code for this presentation is 24955758. And we can see that we have one person who's voted. Food was their first choice. Now we have two people, so housing now has moved up. So as you vote, you'll see the rankings change. So food is taking over. Food and housing is really the number ones and twos. I think they'll probably be interchangeable. There you go. Housing and shelter just moved up to number one. It's a yellow bar at the top. In second place, the second place bar is pink, is food. And we have 7 people voting. In third place right now is medical hospital. Fourth place, accessible transportation. That seems to be holding steady. Food now is back in its number one slot. Oddly enough, work is number 6. So when I was doing this with my colleague yesterday, I think he put work as like number 2 or 3. So that's pretty interesting. And then lastly, dry goods, non-food items, such as things that you can't get with SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits, is in 7th place. So we have 11 people voting. That's great. Thank you for your feedback. I'm just going to check the chat real quick. Housing, yes, housing, that's right there on number 2. That's why we put it there. It's always a big issue for us, especially after a large scale disaster or emergency, whether it's a big fire that takes out a building that has 50 units or more, even 20 units can really devastate us. Apologies once again, a little bit of a delay on my scrolling through the slide. All right, I think I'm going to stop the share and restart it again to see if I can get this to come back, okay?
Okay, sounds good. As Jill takes this technology break, we just want to encourage you to go ahead and start dropping in your questions. You can drop those questions in the chat, or on the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A button with 2 little chat boxes. And if you click it, you're able to ask a question, and we'll be answering these questions at the end of the presentation today. Again, I see that most of you all are joined via Zoom. I don't see any phone call in. So if questions are popping up for you, you can go ahead and start dropping them in the chat.
Okay.
And for those of you who are on a laptop or a computer device, you'll notice that the screen that Jill is sharing is on the left side and that she's on the right side. If you want to make the screen larger, you can hover your mouse right over a little gray tab in between Jill's picture and the slide, and you can slide over to the right to allow that shared screen to be a lot bigger.
Sorry about this. Sorry about that, folks. I was trying to use the Mentimeter app in Zoom, and obviously I hadn't practiced with it. So we are now on the community assets slide. Can everybody see that? You can just, if you can't see it, let me know, or Mariah, let me know.
You're all good, Jill. We can see it.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Um, So a community asset, and I apologize, the image degrades. For me, I'm on a desktop monitor and it's slightly degraded. So if you're on a smaller monitor, you probably can see it a little bit better. But the image on the left is from the Queen's Dragon Boat race that usually happens in August. I don't know if anybody from Queens is on, I hope so. But it's a very lively event that takes place in Corona Park. It involves folks from all different backgrounds and different boroughs come in to compete. And I love this photo. It's by the late Corky Lee, who was a tremendous leader in the Asian American and Chinese American communities. He was at every single event that you can imagine, photographing and really cataloging and making sure that our history was recorded. So I love the posture of the person at the head of the boat. They have their arms raised with a baton. I feel like they won. I'm not sure. There's smiles on the other people in the boat. So I think they won. And why I like to use this picture, because it really, in one photo, one image, it really explains everything that really makes up or can make up a community asset. So they're people, which is the number one thing there on the right hand bullet. Number two, it's the place, it's Corona Park. So for those of you who know Corona Park will be better able to explain it than I can, but it's a place for recreation. During COVID, of course, people could gather there safely and see their friends and family members. You can exercise there and you can take part in great community events like this one, where there's people from all different nationalities and ethnic and religious backgrounds who come to have a good day out on the water. And if you ever take a really deep dive and want to look what's there, you'll notice that they have foods representing a lot of the Queens neighborhoods that surround it. So there's not just Chinese food there. There are empanadas and there are tacos and tortas and all different kinds of food from the rich diversity that is Queens, that is embodied for me in this picture. Also, we talk about infrastructure and, definitely for us, parks are a part of our green infrastructure. Unfortunately, the lakes can also be hazards that we sort of need to be aware of. especially when we have these extreme rainfall events, because the lakes are not equipped always to deal with the extreme rainfall and can overflow, like what happened to the lake next to the Deegan Expressway during Ida. Also what happened on Staten Island with the Willowbrook Lake that's near the College of Staten Island and the Bull's Head and Willowbrook communities there. So it's really something that we want to take stock of what's around us, what provides an asset or resource, but also what may also appear to be a risk. Traditions and policies, I think the tradition in this image and this event is pretty clear. And the policies, that's a little bit less clear behind doing it. It was actually a function of the Hong Kong Trade Organization, if I'm correct. And they wanted to promote Hong Kong and come to visit and do business with us, et cetera. And I think it was really a happy circumstance of creating something really positive for the community, as well as promoting those business interests. And of course, it takes a village to put on an event like this, and there are so many different organizations that are involved, and that's what makes it great. Mariah, I see an option here to give keyboard control to you, and I'm going to see if you have any better luck, because I am not able to advance the slide there. Are you able to do anything with it?
No, Joe, I do not have access to it.
Okay, let me try again. Oh, there we go. It just takes the time it wants to take. I think I might be deleting that add-on. So an example of how this actually has worked in New York City is something I'm going to share from the East Harlem COAD. On this slide, you can see logos from the East Harlem COAD on the left, which is kind of their logos in turquoise with a flashlight for the letter A with a light underneath and a yellow letter A. And mass transit is in the upper right. Their logo appears to be similar to the what we're used to seeing for the different subway lines. And it has their social media information and their website. And the Staten Island COAD is in the bottom right. Their logo is very bold white letters on a gray and black background. The black outline in the center is the outline of Staten Island. What I want to highlight is how mass transit came to connect to East Harlem COAD during COVID. So mass transit started with some students at Mount Sinai School of Medicine on the Upper East Side. East Harlem is, of course, is a part of that. And they really wanted to be able to get masks to vulnerable New Yorkers, specifically unhoused people. And when they were looking around, they realized that there was this East Harlem COAD, and they could connect their resources to a neighborhood asset, which was the COAD. The COAD has been meeting regularly since the East Harlem building explosion several years ago, which we lost a lot of lives and these buildings, but mostly the East Harlem residents got together and said, we have to figure out how we can be better organized to prepare for when an emergency comes. And they have been meeting faithfully and regularly over the last several years, presenting trainings. They work with our agency, they work with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, and have really connected a lot of the dots there, particularly among the healthcare organizations and hospitals and the federally qualified health centers. They've really enhanced training from both emergency preparedness to more medical oriented types of trainings like Stop the Bleed or active shooter trainings, as well as hosting our emergency management folks to do seasonal webinars. So mass transit hooked up with them so they could really put a laser focus on where the need was to distribute these masks. And this was early on in the pandemic when we were all vulnerable, but especially vulnerable for us are, besides people with certain medical conditions or older folks, are people who are unhoused, who tend to have other health conditions, in addition to maybe some cognitive or mental health issues. So they really wanted to be able to reach out to them and to reach out to them in the appropriate language and culture. And they partnered together to create a distribution program. And that also, we've seen that in other community emergency networks in our footprint. The South Bronx Emergency Network also was active distributing masks, excuse me. Staten Island Co-ed, one of their many actions that they did during the early days of the pandemic was just, source local PPE wherever they could, figured out what the burn rate was in their hospitals. And the Staten Island has a unique situation in our boroughs because it has no public hospital, it only has private hospitals, but they were equal partners with the health clinics and really worked hard to make sure that all their residents and staff were taken care of. Staten Island Co-ed monitored burn rate, which is kind of a technical term for how you go through your PPE, and created a very successful fundraising campaign that was shared by their elected officials and different organizations to get those supplies directly into the medical personnel who are really at risk in those early days. So kudos to all these groups. So I hope this gives just a little taste of what the difference is between an asset and a resource. So an asset is not maybe something that you can like put your hand on or has an address, but it still makes up the fabric of your community life. Whereas a resource is something that you can put your hand on, right? Whether it's medical supplies or masks, PPE, hand sanitizer, water, etc. Those are tangibles, but the assets are a little less tangible. So now we're going to throw the question back to you all. And what are some examples of assets in your community? So this is where you really get to free associate. We're not listing anything. We're really relying on your contribution here. What are examples of assets in your community? And on this slide, this was and is a slide of the West Side Community Garden. And I picked the image because, first of all, it's very pretty and it's green, but you can see as well that there's terrace built in with seating. So it's a place that can absorb rainwater as well as providing a little nature in the midst of the city. All right. So that's the full screenshot of the image there. There's a person in it and lots of green plants around a sort of a circular little terrace there with some box planting, lots of trees, and the name West Side Community Garden. So once again, if you could just put into okay, we have our first example of an asset in your community: friendly, neighborly, and supportive residents. That's a beautiful thing to have as an asset in your community. Okay, I know we have lots of other folks there. Red Cross, hospitals, and churches, right? I got to see the Red Cross up close and personal in action at the Staten Island Service Center, and they are right there whenever anything happens. Hospitals and churches and houses of worship are absolutely there on the front lines. They're feeding us, they're taking care of our kids and our older residents and neighbors. Community gardens, thank you for that. Bodega owners, NAACP advocacy groups, 100%, especially these days, like getting the word out about vaccines to our friends in the Black community. We love our NAACP advocacy groups. Community leaders, Thank you. Yes, that's why we call it community emergency planning. Tenant association presidents, community board reps, elected officials, local CERT teams, Red Cross, first responders, churches, that's right, temples, etc., mosques. These are great answers. So we're going to give it another minute to see if anybody else can jump in. Even if you think it's like a goofy thing, stick it in there. I mean, okay. So these are all great examples of assets that we may not necessarily think of when it comes to, oh, whoop, got a few more in community basketball team. Oh, I love whoever put that one in there. What's great about having a community basketball team there? Well, these are people that are probably pretty fit if they're playing basketball, and maybe they might be a resource for us for volunteer labor after an emergency. So thank you for putting that in. Green markets, 100%. When we don't have that much fresh produce flowing into our neighborhoods, but we have a green market nearby, it's a great way to get fresh fruits and vegetables in our community. Okay, so now we're going to go take it this, and once again, this is really an outline. We'll go into more detail when we work with your community emergency network to really get in the weeds and start to map. So on this slide are different links for resources. You don't have to copy and paste them now. They will be all in a resource document that we're going to send you next week. But these are some other ways to look at what people have done. So the Southern Brooklyn COAD has their resource map there. And this is a screenshot of that map. And they've mapped out a few houses of worship, places where people that are members of the COAD, which stands for Community Organizations Active in Disaster, have identified as a place that will direct people on for services. To get any piece of city data, there is a website for that, so that'll be included in your resource guide. I like the Furman Center's State of New York City's Housing and Neighborhoods because you can get a neighborhood snapshot on one page. They've gone to the effort of gathering information from a couple of different sources so you can get a one-page shot of your neighborhood. The New York City Hazard Mitigation website, if you are interested in looking at historical data for your community, you can actually go into this website now and type in your zip code and find out what have historically happened in your community, as well as examples of mitigation efforts throughout the city that other communities are doing. So if you have someone who's really into doing research and wants to really check out what other people are doing, please share that website with them. And of course, your local community board. Oh, well, there you go, Mariah. I see something that we have to update down at the bottom, which is the link for our newsletter. Well, we'll take care of that. That we're going to take that out of the resource guide because we have a different link now for you to sign up for our community preparedness newsletter, which comes out on Constant Contact now. So these resources appear on page 13 of the toolkit. So this is just an introduction to Google My Maps. And when we made up this revamp of the community emergency planning toolkit, we did not include Google My Maps, but we have come to see it as other community groups have shown us how they used it, that it's really an easy and valuable tool to map the confines of the area that you want to work in. So on the left is just an example of what one of our GIS professionals showed us in their video of how to actually use Google My Maps. So the link to the video is there, and I looked at a couple of videos online and I really liked what our GIS person, Samantha Simpson, came up with. It really is clear, it's simple, and we use this with our Strengthening Communities Through Recovery program that Mariah was the head of, and all of our participants were able to use it and really get to make their own Google My Map using that. On the right is a screenshot just of the link when I went on my search engine, and that's what it looks like. And I apologize for the degraded images, but it is an outline of the United States. So you can just zero in, you can put in your county, you can put in your zip code, and then start to work once you narrow down exactly where you want to work in your neighborhood. This is an example of a map, of a Google My Map that I really love. So I wanted to show it to you. And you can see that the folks who created it, this is the Prospect Heights Neighborhood Development Corporation, I think, Council, whatever. And it's they have a community emergency team that actually works on emergency preparedness for Prospect Heights for their neighborhood. And they've actually drilled down and identified communication resources, emergency support resources, including some of the things that you identified: medical, shelter, communications, houses of worship. One thing that I'll point out about this, you can't really see it on this map, but they have, I think you might be able to see my cursor. They've identified a couple of things that are outside their strict blueprint. I encourage you to do that too. For example, the emergency shelter is slightly outside of their neighborhood, but if were something to happen, that's where they would go. They also wanted to include, I don't see it there, but I know it's on the map. They wanted to include the library because that is a resource and an asset, right, for a lot of their community members. And it's just slightly outside their neighborhood, as is one of the bigger houses of worship, which is the synagogue, located sort of covering the H, or covering the N and the H of Crown Heights, kind of in the middle. And that link also will be there. So anybody can take a look at the Google My Maps if they've given us the link. And so again, going to encourage you to think about questions you might have that will relate to your community. And now we're going to swing back to you, just in terms of understanding where you are within our urban context. I'm asking the question, what's the most common form of transportation in your community? So just an arbitrary listing. Number one is the subway. Number two is bus, either private or city. Those are especially popular on all different parts of the city, actually. Maybe you commute into work via one of those buses. Car. So those of us who live in the outer boroughs do rely on cars. I did want to get that bicycle in there because the image on the left is actually the front of a subway stop or metro stop, because I think it might actually be Paris, and a bicycle. Accessoride. And now we can see folks are voting. We can see, wow, bus is coming up as number one. I would really love to see the other 6 people that have been able to vote get on there and vote, because this is giving us a lot of information right now. So just think about what it could even be what you use the most in your community. Okay, we have another one coming in. We're still, subways creeping up to the bus. So would love to have a few more folks voting to see if we can have a little fuller representation of everyone who's in attendance. Okay, we'll give it like 30 more seconds. Please vote. All right. There you go. The number one choice for folks attending this webinar that have voted is the bus, either private or city. So I'll be interested to hear which neighborhoods you're in after this. The second is the subway. Third is a car. Fourth is bicycle. And fifth is Access-a-Ride. Thank you for voting. To give another, since we did mention food as being one of the things we need after an emergency, I wanted to just ask one question. I know that food is a very multi-layered type of question, but just wanted to get a gauge of how far the closest grocery store is to you or your organization. Okay, so yeah, it's a quick vote on this one. So you should, you can take a best guess too. So right now we're showing, what's very different here in New York City is we are blessed with having food resources fairly close to us. And this was really brought home to me during the pandemic when I was attending a Zoom meeting with people from, well, it was actually from all over the world. And a woman who was there was talking about how she has to plan her day once a month going to the grocery store because it is a 50-mile drive for her. So it's an all-day affair. And she can only go once a month, I think, with a neighbor. And that is in a rural area of the United States. I can't remember which state she was in, but that really gave me pause, when I realized how grateful we are. And yes, the top choice for how far is your closest grocery store is less than 5 blocks away. Most of us have a grocery store less than 5 blocks from our house. Once you create the community map using Google My Maps with your network, you can transform that into a resource directory. And this is an actual screenshot from our toolkit on page 15, where you can physically write down, and Mariah has created some excellent fillable PDFs where you can just, plug in the numbers for contact information and whether or not they're in your network and what their role might be. And this is something that you can just be working on after you've identified the different organizations or resources or assets. So they could even be outside of your quote unquote network, but they could still be a resource. Like, could be your local, my neighborhood, the Key Food is the big grocery store next to me. And if I make contact with them, I could include them. And maybe they have, like in some neighborhoods, they've agreed to provide some water to the local co-ad. That's all stuff that you can write down in the resource directory. And it goes into much greater detail. On this page, you can see where, with regards to communication, we're encouraging you to look at what organizations might be able to provide interpretation or translation services, communication resources for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, experience with canvassing or door knocking, and where there might be a community center or information hub near you, and you might have several. I know that Laura's here from Southern Brooklyn, and there are lots of different resources there because they actually have a pretty big footprint. So I would imagine that for the Southern Brooklyn COAD, that there are different community centers that are needed to be a resource. There's one for Coney Island, one for Brighton Beach, one for Marnie's district. And once again, we like to encourage you to include organizations in your resource directory that serve people with disabilities, older adults, children, immigrants, and other vulnerable populations. There also could be local businesses. And I have a little story as to why that could be really useful. Outside your network, I guess that would be us for sure, maybe other agencies with whom you have a relationship, and any groups that have identified being interested in emergencies and emergency planning. So my local business story has to do with Southern Brooklyn, specifically Coney Island. And actually was more a question of a large, why having a house of worship involved was important, because there was a business in Manhattan that needed to just that wanted to make a donation of bedding, pillows, and like comforters, really nice high quality stuff. They were like turning over their inventory. And we identified a house of worship in Coney Island that would take the donation and distribute it to people who needed it after Hurricane Sandy. So that's just a little tidbit of why local businesses could be good. So I can't go to that manufacturer to say, give me money. They're not going to give me money. But if they produce a good like blankets, sheets, towels, etc., chances are they're going to want to rotate their stock. And I would be able to then bring it into my community or to a community in need when they're looking to do that. And they get a tax write-off and we get the benefit of having their goods. And that is the end of my presentation. And I am going to stop sharing the screen and turn on my camera.
Jill, there's a question that's been sitting in our Q&A section, and the person is asking, are there any suggestions for reaching out to houses of worship to bring them into the community emergency preparedness planning process?
Well, that is a great question. I think there's a couple of ways you can do it. First of all, if you have a group of folks that are already engaged in it, the first thing I would do is to canvass my people who are engaged to say, does anyone have contacts in, congregation XYZ? And perhaps one of your own members will have a relationship there. The other possibility is to go through the mayor's office for faith and community, Mariah, what's the name? Partners, faith and community.
Partners, yes, CFCP.
Faith and community partners. And they have a new director. So Mariah and I are just, I did a presentation for them last week and we're going to be connecting with them. So we can connect you to Nancy Pascal, and perhaps she may have someone in your zip code. I'm sure she has her listing by zip code. They have a robust participation and she's starting to engage more with community, with emergency preparedness. So we're excited to be able to deepen that connection in faith-based communities. But that's a great question because they really hold so much of the key, as they do provide so many services in New York City of filling in gaps in neighborhoods. And I don't have to tell you guys that, you know it. They're feeding, they're doing pre-K work, they are providing programming for older adults and sometimes other special populations. They have a connection with immigrant communities. So the first thing I would do is just physically map them. It's just sort of breaking this down. What we really want you to look at it, it's a process. If you look at the end and think, oh, I have to have, an emergency response framework. No, you just start on the process, make a map. When you make the map, and Google is pretty cool because when you go into the Google My Maps, those houses of worship, a lot of them pop up. So even if you don't know them, you might get an idea. Oh yeah, there's that mosque down on, Mermaid. I forgot about them. So that you can just start to break it down that way, and maybe you divvy it up among your members. How about you take this one and you take this one, so that it's manageable. And that's what we're excited to get into when we come back and produce a more fuller expression of this workshop in your networks.
Thank you, Jill. Another one of our participants was very humble and honest in saying, hey, this workshop wasn't based on a description. I thought I was going to receive more technical assistance as to how to create maps. Can you suggest a resource where I can access that information?
Well, absolutely. We are going to send you the link for Google My Maps, and we are also sending a video that explains how to use it. So if that's the only thing you want out of this, you are going to get that information in our resource guide that's going to accompany the slide deck next week that we're going to send to you. So we really appreciate that question.
And the second plug definitely would be if you are an organization and or a network or a faith-based group and you just want a little bit more time with Jill, myself, or Sam, you can put in that request and we can provide you that guidance and meet with you and a couple of other folks from your organization. So we definitely are available for that. We want that to happen. So please know that you don't have to do it completely alone. We're very much here for you as a resource.
Yeah, when I've done this trainings with discrete neighborhoods, did it with, Eastern Queens, with Canarsie, uh, they had parameters. So what's hard when you're doing like a general presentation, as we just did, is we can't put in the boundaries of the whole city to make the map, but we can come into your neighborhood. And so, whether it's Bull's Head on Staten Island or Coney Island or Brighton Beach, you can put in those parameters and really nail it down and tell us what's, your north, south, east, west borders. You can have more than 4 borders too. That's the beauty of Google Maps. So the video will show you how to do that. And then one of the things that I do is just sort of walk people through it. And I'm not like a tech whiz, obviously, after this presentation, but I found Google My Maps to be very easy to work with and really, really a way where everyone can access it, or many people can access it.
Thank you so much, Jill. The other thing that I will offer, Jill mentioned it several times throughout the presentation, is definitely leveraging when you do create your map, knowing that it's a live document. It's not a one and done situation, but also use that as a connecting point. That is a way that you can connect and say, hey, we noticed that you are located in our community. We're not connected, and here's what we're starting, and here's what we want to go. And that can hook people in when they know it's for the greater community. They know who their target population is, and that they absolutely want to be part of the greater community. So we definitely want to encourage that. We will, when you reach out to us individually, we will share the different examples, and connect you with other networks who have gone through this process, so that you can have those offline conversations and connections with them as well. Jill, we're at a stopping point, and we don't have any other major questions, and so I don't know if you have any closing remarks.
My big closing remark would be to sign up for our newsletter, which we'll be sure to put in our email, and to connect with us and to bring us into your community to help you with community emergency planning. So the point of National Preparedness Month is for us to share our resources with you and to connect with you and to help you prepare for emergencies. So we really thank you for the time, and we hope to see you again.